Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, as the gentleman from New York pointed out, over the last 11 years, we have had 0 attacks on our airlines where a knife was involved. 0 attacks. That number cannot get better. However, as we saw on September 11th, that number tragically can get much worse. And so I rise in support of the Grimm, Markey, Cook, Swalwell, Reed, Jackson-Lee amendment, which would prevent the Transportation Security Administration from changing its prohibited item list, also known as the PIL, and allowing small knives on airplanes. I want to thank the amendment's co-sponsors for their hard work on this issue. I also want to thank TSA Administrator John Pistol. Administrator Pistol announced today that the TSA will not allow knives on airplanes. And I think this is a strong step forward. And after listening to the stakeholders, his position is now that these knives should not be on airplanes. Like many Americans in our country, I was very deeply concerned and confounded when the administrator announced that they would consider allowing knives on airplanes. We saw after September 11th that, as my friend from New York mentioned, 0 attacks occurred in our country. We do now have new threats. The threat from liquids or IEDs could seriously jeopardize the safety of airlines and the passengers who ride on them. However, just because we have new threats that are posed against our airline safety does not mean that we should no longer consider old threats. The TSA must learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time. And so I was proud to work with my friend from New York to organize a letter along with Congressman Thompson, our ranking member on Homeland Security, and objected to that policy, in particular the failure of the TSA to consult with the key stakeholders who would be most affected by this change, such as flight attendants, passenger safety groups, transportation screening officers as well. The letter had a total of 133 members signing on to it. Congressman Grimm and Markey also organized a subsequent letter with a similar number of members who signed on to it. Just like my friend from New York, I also worked in law enforcement prior to coming to Congress. I worked as a local deputy district attorney in the district attorney's office in Alameda County. I also served under this Capitol dome as an intern when September 11th happened. I know what terrorists can do if they have a mission to hurt passengers. I also know, as a prosecutor, what a knife can do in a close, confined area. It's not difficult then to understand why so many members chose to sign on to our letter. And TSA's mission, I want to remind the people of this body, is not only to protect the airline passengers from a terrorist attack, it's also to protect us and protect passenger safety in general. TSA justified its decision by saying that it would allow the TSOs to move more quickly. However, when you put a limit now on what length of knife would be allowed, what the TSOs effectively become are NFL referees measuring first downs. You can imagine the scene. You have a knife coming through, the TSO can't determine how big it is, so he's got to take out the measuring tape, holding up a long line, preventing him from looking at liquids or other explosives and whether they could bring down an airline. And then he's got to declare if it's allowed or not. All the while, bags are still moving through to be screened. This would actually make it harder to detect liquids than make it easier, as the TSA had announced. Had the TSA meaningfully consulted with the stakeholders before announcing its proposal, these issues would have been addressed. But I do appreciate Administrator Pistol in his decision to put the policy on hold, to give more time for input, and I appreciate his decision today stating that he no longer will allow knives on boards. Our amendment reaffirms the current ban on knives on planes. It would prohibit the TSA from making the change it had proposed and now has backed away from. Our amendment is supported by a number of groups, including the Coalition of Flight Attendants Unions, International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Coalition of Airline Pilots Association, and American Federation of Government Employees. It's important that we pass this amendment today to show that the House stands with these groups and the flying public in rejecting knives on airplanes. I again want to thank my colleagues who are co-sponsors of this amendment, Mr. Grimm from New York, Mr. Markey, Mr. Cook, Ms. Jackson-Lee, and Mr. Reed. I appreciate their efforts, and I encourage all members to support our amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.